to Got It, the filmmaking podcast that's got your back. My name is Emilio Miguel Torres.
And I'm Toby Romero.
I'm a Seattle-based freelance director.
And I'm a Los Angeles-based cinematographer.
And on this podcast, we talk about our journey in this filmmaking world and us starting our career. And we try to share whatever film knowledge we got. And last week, we had our first episode. And we talked about our backgrounds, how Toby and I met each other. So if you haven't listened to that, check that out. But this week, we're actually going to talk about a really exciting topic. What are we going to talk about this week, Toby?
We are talking about film school, the highly debated college education.
Yeah, both Toby and I have TikToks where we post filmmaking videos, and Toby's is a little newer, so I don't know if you've experienced this, Toby, but I know like probably my most commonly asked question on my TikTok from like people who watch them are like, how was your film school experience? Is film school worth it? So I figured we could just do an entire episode about our film school experience and share our, tidbits about it.
Yeah, totally. Sure. Well, I think before we get into that, we do have some explaining to do. Why did we name this podcast Got It, Emilio?
Yeah, so Got It is, I think, the perfect name for this podcast for a couple reasons. One, it's kind of a fun name because, we're trying to share our knowledge about filmmaking with you all. So it's kind of like, got it, when we share something. But the real reason why is because this is actually something Toby taught me my freshman year of film school. And it was kind of one of the first things, because going to film school, Toby knew a little more about like set protocol than me. Because I don't know if I mentioned this first episode, but when I went to film school, I really did not know that much about the filmmaking process. And there's a lot of like rules and terms on being a set that I had to learn at film school. Toby knew some of them already. And one of them is the concept of saying got it when you hand something to someone. Toby, you want to explain it a little more?
Yeah. So normally on set, the protocol between the AC and the camera operator, usually when you're switching lenses, lenses are obviously really expensive, ranging anywhere from like $1,000 to like $100,000, so you want to be really careful with that equipment. And the best kind of mode of practice when handing off a lens and switching is when you take off a lens and you hand it over to your first AC. The first AC will, the camera operator will pretty much announce a question, got it, as a question, and then that first AC will go, got it, affirming that they have got the lens in their hands and they have control of it, therefore relinquishing the control of the camera operator.
Yeah, and it's one of those rules that like whenever I tell people about it, they kind of think it's silly, but it's insane how much it saves you on set. One of my first on-set experiences at NYU, I dropped a remote follow focus. Now, remote follow focuses, they're not the most fragile thing, luckily. But like if I was holding a lens or something else that was fragile, like that could have been really bad and had me, get a bad rep as a guy who breaks stuff on set. And that's because when that person handed me their follow focus, they did not confirm that I indeed had it. And when Toby told me about this freshman year, I kind of laughed at it, but then it kind of became a joke between us where if I handed him anything, I'd say got it, and he'd say got it. Like if I was handing him a remote, for the Roku in our room. And so it was kind of a joke, but honestly, Toby and I do it all the time when we're on set. And it was especially helpful when we ran Ultrawave because we did a lot of really fast run and gun stuff. And so when you're like going really fast in New York City and you're passing cameras and lenses and recorders onto each other, it's important to have some sort of protocol to make sure you're not just like giving a camera to someone and then they're going to drop it. And also Maggie, who, oftentimes will be on this podcast with us. She's not going to be on this week's episode because she's currently on a plane to Arizona because that's where she's moving to study acting this next year. But she'll be back, in future weeks. But her and I also do that. Every time I hand her anything, I say, got it. And it sounds so silly, but it's one, very fun thing to do with your friends. And two, actually will save your life when you're dealing with anything fragile.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's just like, again, reiterating what Emilio's saying, it does sound stupid and it does sound super like total tidbit, like super like detail oriented, like not really necessary sometimes. But when you're on set and you're moving so fast and things are happening so quick, and oftentimes you're running on low energy or low sleep, a lot of kind of basic things that you would expect in your life just like happen normally don't. Like, I mean, that's kind of one of the biggest rules in filmmaking is you always have to plan for the worst because it will always happen. There's always going to be something wrong on set. So everything on set that you could do to kind of prepare and take on the erring on the side of caution, the better, you know, like the first AD, the first assistant director's kind of role on set is to make sure that everyone's being cautious no matter what there is. You know, that's the main rule of the AD is safety first. So, I mean, whenever you're on set, it's always good to err on the side of caution, whatever it may be, equipment or someone's health or, you know, any kind of situation that may occur.
And I think it's kind of the perfect name for our podcast, like I said, because one, it's an inside joke between us, one, it's related to film, but also, like, I think Toby and I have a shared goal with this podcast where, you know, we don't have decades of experience in the industry yet, but we're also not, like, you know, brand new to filmmaking, so we have a little bit of knowledge, and we're trying to make a career for ourselves, so we just want to share our journey, and our kind of goal audience are either people getting interested in film, or maybe they just start getting in film, and they're trying to get to that next level of being a filmmaker, and, something like got it, like that term, is just one of many things that aren't going to come naturally and you're not always going to necessarily learn them just from teaching yourself, but you have to make movies to learn those kind of things. So that kind of encapsulates what the goal of this podcast is, and I think that helps us get right into the next phase. And we're going to be talking about film school today, breaking down into different parts, and Toby and I have had very similar experiences but also very different experiences in filmmaking. And I also think Toby and I can share some interesting things because Toby really wants to be a cinematographer and he's kind of always known he's wanted to be a cinematographer, so he's chosen a specific path that reflects that. Meanwhile, me, I've always wanted to be director, and so I've kind of made a path that made sense for me. But let's just go and start off with before film school. Toby, why don't you walk us through very briefly kind of how film was in your life in high school and then what your application process was like for NYU.
Sure. Yeah. So in high school, I went to a pretty large public school, so we didn't really have a film program to offer. We weren't really kind of, I think, you know, a lot of places in the States don't really have a geared, like, good art program, especially for public schools. So I was kind of, you know, lacking in that sense, but I came across this great opportunity called Ghetto Film School, which has a New York and an LA campus. And it's like a 30-month intensive course that pretty much gave me a full crash course in filmmaking and film production and gave me such a good kind of level of understanding of all the things you need to know about film before I went to NYU, which was huge for me. And I had really, you know, unlike Emilio, I kind of grew up not knowing I wanted to go into film. And, you know, I've never been the biggest movie buff. Like, you know, when there's a director or a cinematographer that I like that comes out with something, I'll see it. But it's not like I'm doing every single thing in my power to watch every new movie that comes out. And that's kind of, you know, I kind of stray off the path of that. I was definitely more kind of math and science oriented. I didn't even like English. So I've definitely kind of taken the less traveled direction in that sense. But having, you know, that ghetto film school experience, I definitely had that head start. And then going into NYU, I knew that I wanted to go into film school after doing ghetto film school. I knew I wanted to go into film. So then I started applying. I created a spreadsheet of like 15 of the best film schools. And, you know, I did like research on like on Google, like best film schools in the United States. And you know, I came up with this big short list, and I think a few of the schools that I applied to were obviously NYU, USC, Emerson, UC Santa Cruz, because I'm from California, I'm a California resident, UCLA, Chapman University. Those are just a few to name, but I mean, all have great film programs and very comparable to NYU. So that's kind of where I started applying, and, you know, through Ghetto Film School, I had a really good creative portfolio of all the work I had shot and had done. And I actually had the opportunity to do a summer program at NYU as well before I was even in college. So I do recommend that if, you know, you have the funds, or there's a lot of scholarships too to get those kind of summer programs out. And, you know, that really solidified my decision on going to NYU because I, you know, fortunate enough to get into a lot of different schools, and it was, you know, necessarily came down to, you know, where did I want to be geographically, and I had only been in New York City once, and it was for NYU, and it was the summer program, and I just loved it, and I thought that being immersed in kind of this creative environment where everyone has a dream was super special. And, you know, coming from LA, you can't really, like, you know, that is like one of the biggest film hubs, so I think New York was a great kind of step into the unknown, going to the other side of the country. And yeah, and I mean, it all kind of, for me, the application process was pretty straightforward just because was really fortunate in the sense that I had a lot of films that I could submit. So I think I submitted 3 different short films. I created 2 of them through Ghetto Film School, and the third one I submitted was the film that I created at the NYU summer program, which was really powerful because, they saw that the quality that I could make with their kind of education, like with the resources in New York, and they're like, oh, this kid, he knows how to tell a story, and if he's going to continue to make these stories in New York, then we want to welcome him in and help him do that. So I think that was a really powerful kind of way to get in. But if you're not so like fortunate in that sense, I'm sure Emilio can elaborate more in terms of he's just scrappy. He made it work. He hustled and did everything to just get to NYU and get to one of those like big name film schools. And that's kind of great about us, is that we have those kind of 2 very different paths. So I mean, I let Emilio, you can speak for yourself and your kind of journey.
Yeah, so I wanted to be a filmmaker pretty much as long as I can remember. Actually, I mean the time that I was quote is when I was a kid. I remember Revenge of the Sith, the Star Wars movie, came out in theaters, and that was the only, before the new like trilogy of movies came out. The only Star Wars movie I was old enough to see in the theater was Revenge of the Sith when it first came out, and I still to this day remember going to that theater and being a child and going into the theater and looking around and seeing a theater packed with adults who were dressed up as Jedi. And I remember like I was like 5 or 6, and it kind of clicked in my head like, this movie is so cool that grown adults are dressing up because they love it so much. And it kind of like clicked in my head like how important movies are. And then also I got Revenge of the Sith, the DVD, as a kid, and on that DVD they had like the making of, like how they made the movie, and that was super influential on me because I became obsessed with like, oh, this could be my job. I could play with lightsabers all day. And then I just started making movies when I was young. I got really into YouTube, so I wanted to buy a camera, and I've been making YouTube videos since I was like 10 years old. Just again, I said this in the first episode, but I think I've always just been obsessed with the idea of like, have an idea, make it, and put it out there, even if it's bad. It helps you grow a lot. So I've always been that way, and I kind of knew I wanted to go to film school since as old, like I think around 13 was when people started telling me to think about college. And at that point I was like, I just want to go to film school. And I Googled what are the best film schools, and it was USC and NYU, and I was set on those 2. And then as I got a little older, I did more research and realized NYU was the better program for me. Both schools to get into is an honor, so I was pretty presumptuous to like choose one. But I applied to both, but I knew that NYU is the one I really, really want to get into. And I've always loved New York, so there's a lot of reasons why. But yeah, I also went to a school that didn't necessarily have a film program, but we did have a video production class. But it was a very interesting video production class because the way it worked is that you had to do a year of photography, which was a class at the school, and then a year of graphic design. In graphic design, you learned, graphic arts. And in graphic arts, you learned how to do Photoshop and Illustrator and iMovie and GarageBand. And that class was super big for me because I'm also a freelance graphic designer as well as a filmmaker, and my graphic design and photography skills kind of all started because of those classes. And then once you did those 2 classes, you could do video production, but video production is a self-guided class, so you basically get an hour every day to just work on videos. And so for a lot of kids who took that class, it was just basically a free hour to do whatever they wanted to, but of course I used that time to make stuff. And I made a lot of videos for like my school or just for fun with friends. But then I made a short film. I wrote it myself, shot it myself, did the sound on it, operated camera. I was the only crew member. I was just running around with my friends shooting the movie. That's called That's Life. You can watch it on YouTube. I edited it myself. And I did that the fall of my senior year. And that I'm not the proudest of that short film, but given the context and how little I actually knew about how to make movies, I'm still pretty proud of it. And I think it's a good example of what really matters when you're applying to film school, which is what I'm going to get to, which is that a lot of times people ask me, like, how do I set myself up to be the best applicant for, like, a film program? And I always tell people, like, as Toby's example, they accept people with, like, experience on making short films and being on sets. They also accept people who have never touched a camera before, because I really think NYU, specifically as a school, only really cares how good of a storyteller you are, because, like, they're going to teach you how to direct, how to work with camera, how to work with lighting, like whatever you want to learn technically they'll teach you. But it's they want to see that you have a way of telling stories and also you have an interesting perspective. So I think that short film I made, not technically impressive at all, but I do think it showed promise of like me understanding story structure and having a point of view. So I made that short film and I submitted it. I submitted to the only film schools I applied to was NYU, USC. I actually missed the film school deadline to USC, so I only applied to like USC, the school, and then I was going to try to transfer into film if I got in. And then I applied to Emerson, and then I applied to a bunch of other colleges that didn't have a film program, but like they maybe had like a film studies program or media production
Yeah.
program, which is a big thing. And actually, I have a friend named Blake Rizzo, who I have worked with on a project this year, and he's a filmmaker as well, based out of Seattle. And he went to University of Washington, and they don't have a film program, but he's a great example of someone who didn't have a film program, but they kind of made their own film program and took the right classes and learned from it. I think he'd be a great guest on the show, and sometime in the future he could talk about that. But anyway, back to my application process. I just brought him up because I'm just trying to say that there's many different paths. But
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think that that's a really good example of making it work, not necessarily going to the most traditional film school or just like being creative in the way that you can use your resources. Like I think another kind of smart way that you can do things is like, say you go to a school next to NYU and you start getting friends that are in the NYU film school, but you go to maybe more traditional school getting like an English degree or something. And if you just, like I'm sure Emilio, if we were in this position at NYU and like someone was just our friend and they wanted to like learn more about movies and get on set and they were a hard worker and, they kept their head down when they were supposed to and did what they were kind of asked and learned from it and got better and better, we would continue to work with them even though they didn't like go to NYU. It's not like this exclusive club that we're trying to keep people out of. It's more so just like NYU welcomes a lot of collaboration just because of the environment and the structure that it's set up. But that's not to say that you can go to a different school and have friends that go to NYU or just like be around people that are at other film schools and that, you can still collaborate with them. You're not like cheating on your school or, there's no kind of like exclusivity barrier in that sense.
and then also just like NYU as a program makes so many projects that it's kind of hard for every project to have a sole NYU crew. And like most projects I feel like I've been a part of at NYU have at least one person who's not attached to NYU at all, whether it's like actors or some random crew member or it's somebody in post. There's a lot of post people who get involved too, but and I think that's a great point, and we can kind of loop back to that because when we finish this discussion we're going to talk about whether film school's worth it or not. But I'll speed up my application process. So I got into NYU, and really big day in my life. Very excited because I've dreamed about it for so long, and when it came down to it for me to choose a college, it was between NYU and then University of Chicago. And University of Chicago I got into, and it's a very good school, and they had a film studies program that was really good. And they also offered me more scholarship money than NYU did. So there was a lot of reasons for me to go for University of Chicago. But when I went there, I actually did my research and I found out that their film studies program was truly just like a theoretical program. And I think this is really important for people to realize. Sometimes people go to film school for film studies or cinema studies or some other related program term, and really that program is not about making movies. It's about watching movies, writing about movies, studying movies, and that's awesome, and that's even like a way to be a filmmaker for some people, but that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to make stuff. And so because of that, I decided to go with NYU, also because it was my dream school. And I think what's really important to point out in my journey is that when I went to film school, I had never been on set before. Every project I'd ever made, I completely shot, directed, edited, wrote myself, produced myself. I didn't know anything about terms. I did not know how to use Premiere. I had never used a cinema camera. Like I knew nothing going to film school. When I went to film school, I got there just learning iMovie and shooting with like a Rebel T3i or whatever. And I'm bringing this up because Toby did an NYU program. Toby did another like actual film program when he was extracurricular. And then also Toby and I have friends who went to film high schools or had worked on features. Like we literally know someone who directed a feature before they went to NYU. And I'm just bringing this up to prove that when you go to film school, you can really get in with any level of knowledge you have. And I felt really intimidated because when you look up and like on YouTube, like NYU accepted short films, this stuff is crazy. Like, there's so many short films you're like, that is so good. Like, how could I ever do that? And then you watch mine and you're like, oh, I could probably get in. So, you know, I just think there's lots of different paths, and I think Toby and I are a good example of like one person who, you know, had experience beforehand and got in, and then also Toby and I have friends who did NYU like summer programs and then got in. And then we have friends who literally never touched a camera before they went to film school. So it's just it's a big different process, but our different application journeys were that. So I think the next question is kind of just in summary, how was your first year at NYU, Toby?
Yeah, freshman year was definitely, it was interesting because, you know, it's almost like NYU in particular doesn't have a campus, so you're kind of adapting to just becoming a New Yorker, and you know, New York is a very kind of I guess, I don't know, rigorous might be the word, but just it definitely is demanding. It's a demanding city, and you know, it's an intense, exactly, it's an intense environment. And so, you know, me coming from like Los Angeles, which is obviously a lot more spread out and laid back, coming to New York, it was a big adjustment period. So I feel like I wasn't creating as much in the beginning because I was just trying to get my kind of footing and get my kind of friend groups going. Like I didn't meet I mean, I met Emilio pretty early on, but in terms of our kind of film group, we didn't really develop that until second semester, I don't think. So it was, first semester was a lot of just kind of getting comfortable and starting college classes and getting kind of, you know, the normal kind of getting your footing that any college student would have. I just think it takes a few more weeks with NYU just because it's, you know, no, there's not a big campus, like there's no campus, it's just buildings in New York City. So you're just like basically living in New York, you're a New Yorker. You know, I was 18 and I was like experiencing all this freedom and a lot of responsibility that I hadn't had before. And because of that, I think I definitely sacrificed a lot more of my time, which I could have been creating movies, to just like figuring out life, which is fine because now I have that comfortability of just like being able to go out and shoot stuff whenever I want, but also still valuing that responsibility and freedom that you get from college. So I think first semester was definitely an adjustment. Second semester, and that's when we, you know, kicked off Ultrawave. We really got close with me and Emilio as creators, got really close. We kind of extended our group, our social group, in terms of collaborators who we were working with. And I think first semester was geared a little bit more towards like classes and just basic structure of filmmaking. And then second semester was more like, let's just go out and shoot stuff on our own. Like we've got the equipment, we've got the people, and we're in New York City. Like, let's just find people that want to make stuff and let's go make stuff. And I think that that's what we did a lot second semester.
So I'd say on that note, I loved my freshman year at NYU, but that's actually like not the most popular trend, I'd say. I think a lot of people, when they go to NYU in particular, and I think this is true of a lot of film schools, don't always love their first year. And we kind of talked about this on the first episode. It's because you don't, the classes aren't really set up for you to shoot that much.
But that you do shoot way more. You do shoot way more than any other college. Like, I think the appeal to NYU is that you pretty much get a camera, or you get audio training your first day. It's the way that the curriculum. Yeah, you want to talk about the curriculum?
Oh no, I guess what I'm saying is that like, and I can give context for this, is that, so what you're saying is, NYU first year is split into 2 semesters. The first semester is either an audio or visual semester, and then the second semester is the vice versa of that. And in that class, you get given, you know, a 5D DSLR camera, and it's a class about visual storytelling. And then your next semester, you learn Pro Tools and how to operate a mic, and it's all about audio storytelling. And I think it's great curriculum. But the way that those classes are set up, you're not ever really making traditional like narrative short films, which is
Correct.
what people go to NYU for. And so the only reason I bring that up is that for a lot of people, that's like a downside. But for someone like me who knew nothing about how to properly make movies, it was like heaven, because not only do you have those technical classes where I was learning a ton, but then we had these film lectures, and I, you know, got exposed to a lot of movies I'd never watched before. We'd have writing classes. I'd never actually taken a writing class before, like a script writing class. And so I learned so if I really look at what I knew going to film school to where I ended, like I learned exponentially so much. I left NYU. I was really good at Premiere. Like Toby said in the first episode, I was getting so good with Premiere that I could edit a whole 5-minute YouTube video in like a couple hours. Like but the reason I was successful in that way. And the reason why I think some people aren't, and this is why I always encourage people with like, you go to film school, just make stuff, is that sometimes people think like if their classes don't require them to make something, then yeah, I'm just going to enjoy college life. And that's totally fine. I'm not hating on you for doing that. But if your goal is to make stuff, you have the tools, you have the resources, and you're literally in the greatest city on earth. Go make shit. And so I think, I think for Toby and I, we're always making stuff, and that helped us, and that helped my freshman year be successful. And then when I went back home that summer, Toby and I made a short film called Wannabe, which I'm still pretty proud of. And when you look at Wannabe and you compare it to my short film I made to apply to NYU, like it's like night and day. Still Wannabe isn't the best thing I've made at this point. I have other projects I'm prouder of, but just to think about in 1 year I learned all that is pretty crazy. So I think first year at any film school, if you go to it, can be really good or bad, but you really have to make the most of it. But also, like, it's okay if you're going to college and you want to just be a normal college student, that's fine. But if your goal is to make stuff, sometimes you have to be, and this is in general in film school, just sometimes you have to be a self-starter to make the most out of a program. And I have friends who go to other film programs, and maybe the courses aren't set up for them to make a lot of stuff. So then they just have to find ways to make their own things, because at the end of the day, no one has to go to film school, right? Like, you could just start making movies today, and if they're good enough, you're gonna be fine. So going to film school, in theory, should just help you make more stuff. And if your classes aren't doing that, then it's kind of on you to make stuff if that's what you want to do. And so I think that's a good, in terms of, I think that's a misconception about film school, is that if you go there and then
Right.
they're gonna force you to make short films. It's kind of like you have, like, the way that the classes are set up is that, like, really you could just make passable, fine short films and to get a degree. But if you want to make the most out of it, you have to be a self-starter. So that's one of my biggest misconceptions about film school, is that you kind of have to go there, and even though you're in a program, you still have to advocate for yourself. And so that leads us to our next talking point. Toby, do you have any misconceptions about film school that you discovered in your process through NYU?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the biggest ones that I definitely kind of, reflect at night about is the idea that everything that you go to film school to learn can be also learned online for free. Which, let's be honest, it's true, Like, you could definitely learn all the techniques and watch all the movies and do all of that online. But I think for me, and for what I think a lot of people at NYU as well, it's the people that you meet and the artists that you're surrounded by. I am a creator that really works off inspiration of others, and when I see three other of my friends like totally passionate and wanting to make this project, then I'm like totally on board with it as well. Like, I think as a creator, I drive, and I kind of excel on other people's creativity, on other people's passion and motivation. And I don't think if I didn't go to film school, I don't think I would have found that as intimately, because when you think about it, college is like a luxury resort. You pay a bunch of money to go live without your parents with a bunch of other young people that all have a similar dream to you, and you have these 4 years to kind of make that dream a reality and meet super awesome people in that process. And I mean, I think the best example is like Emilio. We would have probably never have met if we didn't go to NYU together. So it's like, and I would imagine that this is a
You would have
relationship.
bullied me in high school.
No. This is a relationship that we will continue for years and years to come, and I think that we have such a good working relationship and collaboration that I hope we can continue to work on and continue to really perfect for bigger and bigger projects as we scale our careers. And I think that's kind of the biggest thing for me, is like, yes, you can learn everything online, but you can't learn connection, and you can't learn working relationships. That's something that you have to go out and do. And I think that it's definitely possible without film school, but I think film school just creates an environment for really passionate young filmmakers to go find other really passionate young filmmakers and go make some movies.
Yeah. No, I mean, you said it. I agree with everything you said, totally co-sign. And I think what you're pointing at, which is really clear, is that, like, going to film school, especially film school like NYU, unless you get immense scholarship support, it's really expensive. And so Toby and I are in a positions of privilege that, we have a supportive family, and we can afford to take on, loans and stuff to make it work. And I think Toby and I as people like understand that it's a privilege that we get to go here because so many people want to go here. Um, and so we try to make the most of it because it's totally true. You could, everything we've learned the past 3 years at film school, we could have learned online. But the misconception, which Toby's talking about, is one, it's a lot harder to teach yourself because you don't know what you don't know. And so while everything, like I could grab a YouTube video that teaches you everything I've learned this past 3 years. 3 years ago, I wouldn't have known what to like look for. Like there's like I needed someone to guide me, and the curriculum
That's
does
like
that.
that's a huge talking point right there. Is like I think when I have a quick anecdote from that exact point is that I went to film school and I learned all about like codecs and proxying and post production and all that. And as a cinematographer, you wouldn't really think you need to know that, but it's important and it's important for your workflow. And I just finished working on a music video with one of my close friends here in LA, and we were basically we were proxying footage, which means we were taking a 6K file and bringing it down to 720p, and it was a raw file, and we were just making it a more editable codec. So basically what that means in more simple terms is that a really, really big file size that was like 18 gigabytes was compressed down to like a 14 megabyte file. So obviously compressed to like a 1/100th. So you can, and you do that so then you can edit in a better workflow. So you don't, normal computers can't handle a 6K footage to edit on. So we had proxied our footage, and then we were starting to edit that footage with the proxies, and then it came time to export that project. And I remember going, okay, make sure we disable the proxies and export with the original footage. And he goes, wait, what? I was like, yeah. The proxy is just so you can edit, and then once you export, you go back to the normal footage, so you don't lose any of that detail, because you record 6K for a reason, so you can color better and get better details and all of that. And then he's like, no. I just export the proxy, and I just have a 720p file. So I'm like, wait. So you're shooting 6K and then exporting to 720p. And I guess for some of our more less technical listeners, it doesn't necessarily make too much sense. But basically, it's like taking a Ferrari and only driving 20 miles an hour. Right? So it's
If you drove 100 miles an hour, but only getting there miles per time. No, I mean I think, and it's stuff like that. It's like those post things, but also on-set things I learned just from being at school. And in Seattle, there's a pretty active like independent filmmaking community, and so I've been thinking about there's an alternate universe where Emilio just stayed in Seattle and joined some indie film crew sets and crewed, and over time I would have probably learned what I learned, but it would have been a lot harder. I would have had to do it myself, and I would have it would be hard for me to have guidance over the exact things I need to learn. And I also wouldn't have, friends my age who are going to grow in this community. Because obviously the biggest perk of film school is your networking and your relationships. Because Toby and I already have had benefits of going to film school and the people we know. But there's also people we know that 10 years from now are going to end up being relevant in our careers, and we're just not really aware of it now because they're just our friends for now. And Toby and I will have value in meeting at film school. So I think to kind of summarize the whole misconception conversation, I'd say my biggest misconceptions, and I think, Toby, if I can kind of summarize your point too, is like, number one, people assume that you have to know a lot about film to get into film school. Totally wrong. Number two, people assume that film school is a waste of money because everything you can learn in film school you can learn online. True, but it's very difficult, and there's benefits of doing it through a film school program. And three, people think that if you go to film school, then you're set, you're golden, you've already made it. But that's that's also not true. You have to be a self-starter. You have to recognize that you're in a privileged position, and you have to work extra hard if you want to do stuff. If you just want to coast and get a degree, you can do that. Because we have, I know plenty of people who maybe they go there and they're not as motivated, and that's fine. But for someone like me, I knew that I got there and I had to make the most of it. And especially because I graduated in 3 years, I had to do that. And the reason I graduated in 3 years is our next talking point, COVID. So halfway through my experience at NYU, in the spring of sophomore year, we got hit with COVID. And my sophomore year, I think, was really great for Toby and I, because in the fall, we had a class where we were making a bunch of really short black and white projects that taught us a lot. about visual storytelling. We had a professor named Ulrich Brown, who I said last episode is like one of my biggest mentors. That's still true. So our fall sophomore year helped us learn a lot, and then it's going to spring. We're ready. We're going to make a lot of cool stuff. We're getting ready to shoot the ladder, and then COVID happened. So Toby, walk me through how has this past year been? How did COVID affect your film school journey? What were the pros and cons of film school during COVID?
Yeah, I mean, I think just going back quickly to first semester too, just highlighting that class, Sight and Sound Filmmaking. I think that's NYU's staple class. You know, that's like the class that they sell, and that is kind of the class that people go to film school for. And I think, you know, if you're debating on what schools to go to, and you start looking at some of these Sight and Sound film projects, I think that's kind of the class you learn the most. And you know, that's kind of my persuasion point in terms of why NYU, and it was great that we could have Ulrich as a professor, because he just, you know, brings the best out of you. And I think that's also another thing about film school is the professors that you're exposed to. That's kind of, you know, a lot of people think they're just like failed filmmakers, but there are professors out there that really just want to teach and that love to teach. And I think the best part about Ulrich is he was a teacher first and then a filmmaker second, which I think was really, really helpful for us, because he was always, you know, there to engrave knowledge and then back it up with actual film information. But anyways, yeah.
I have a funny relationship with him because I think when we did class with him, like I really, really committed to his, you know, curriculum and teachings. I would meet with him a lot, and so I think we developed a little bit of a relationship. And then I actually had him again during COVID virtually. But he always, my favorite thing about Ulrich is that you will write him the longest and most well thought out email, being like, hey, you know, professor, I really liked what you said in class, and this is what I was thinking about. And he'll just reply and be like, okay.
He'll hit the one liner. You hit a whole paragraph. He'll hit the K period.
To say this little story. So today, completely separate, I have a short film that I shot this spring called Valor and Sacrifice. It got accepted into the Seattle Latino Film Festival, which is going to be in October of this year, and that just today got accepted into the International Social Change Film Festival, which is a film festival about social issues. So I was really excited because Ulrich always tells us, like, you know, make projects with like a bigger picture mission or a bigger idea that like it matters. So I texted him, I was like, oh, he's gonna be so excited. And so I sent him this long email, you know, thanked him for helping with the film, and then he just said congrats. But anyway, so going into COVID, how was it for you, Toby? What happened?
So it was tough because we got taken out right in the middle of our semester, and that was my second semester sophomore year. So I was in a documentary kind of filmmaking class, and we had to switch to online, and we were making.
I was actually Toby's TA for that class.
Yeah, we were making we were making like one doc every 2 weeks, and then COVID hit, and then, you know, we put a pause, and then the way that NYU kind of reevaluated production was like, okay, so we know you're paying $80,000 a year to go to film school, but you know that little handheld device you use to call people? Yeah, so we're gonna be shooting on that, and it's only allowed to be you, and it has to be indoors. So that was, you know, obviously they had the reasons. I mean, it was like no one knew what the virus was at that point, what was going to happen to the world and all of that. So they were trying to make things work. And I applaud them for that, but I mean, there also is a lot of critique in that sense. But anyways, I start making these kind of different type of documentaries for that class, which, you know, are utilizing my house. And it's like, I think we talked a little bit about this last time, Emilio, is just like, you become more creative with the limitations you have. And I think that's when I really started to look at framing and composition for the first time. And like, I had always heard, you know, like different size lenses change the perspective, the field of view. You know, when you have a wide lens and you go really up close, the face looks a lot more exaggerated in terms of length and depth, whereas you take a really long lens, it looks very compressed. And I think that's when I started to really kind of take a look at a lot of the technical things, because there wasn't so many other variables thrown at my environment. So I created a few documentaries that really kind of, I was able to hone in my craft. And as a cinematographer, knowing lenses and knowing the effects that all of those do, I think are super important. So in terms of, you know, COVID and making movies, I wasn't on these, you know, bigger student sets that I had been in the past. I didn't have 3 or 4 people to help me light a scene. It was just me, and sometimes I would only be using the lights that were in my environment and shooting on my iPhone. But I got the chance to really kind of examine, like, hey, you know, when I zoom in my iPhone but put it like 20 feet away from me, look how compressed my head is. Or if I use like the really wide angle on the camera, and put it really close, what does that do? And I think that was kind of my biggest takeaway for that semester, was just like being able to be in such a controlled environment where I got to focus really technically on the elements of filmmaking, specifically camera lenses.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think even just watching you, I think, at these past years of working with you, like you're such a gearhead, and it's really great because like you understand equipment, you know what equipment's good and stuff like that. But I felt like COVID was a great growing time for you because it was like suddenly when you don't have access to a better camera, like, oh, I guess I can, like, like I think when you think of Roger Deakins, like of course he shoots on Alexa and film and like is happy with that, but I'm sure if he had to, he would love, like, happily shoot a movie on an iPhone and just make it look awesome, because it's just about the frame and the lighting. But yeah, so okay, you're back home, you did COVID
Yeah.
virtually, you're making projects, and then what
Yeah.
was summer 2020 like, and then how about this past year?
Yeah. So the summer I was doing again another internship with Warner Brothers. That was my third summer with them. It was virtually, obviously remote, and I was doing kind of a hybrid between. I was a feature post production intern for Warner Brothers feature post, which edited all the big movies that they get, like the 12 movies they get every year. I was kind of like working more on the sidelines as like starting, helping the producers schedule out the post schedules. So it wasn't hands on really. And, I'm all about hands on. So it was great experience and learning, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And then I was also at New Line Cinema, working as a physical production intern. So that was a lot more of like pre-production end of things, like planning for shooting. And I think that was really interesting to kind of take away because it was super, like everyone had no idea what to do. These producers and executives had been in the film industry for 20, 25 years. And then suddenly it's like, oh, this virus comes and we can't make a movie. So how do we keep everyone safe, but also, make money and continue to make movies and do what we love? So it was a lot of troubleshooting. It was a lot of figuring out like, okay, how can we, shoot this movie with being safe? And I think at that time, a lot of, like socially distant scripts got greenlit, like scripts that didn't have a lot of cast members, scripts that were like in the middle of nowhere, didn't require a big city or anything. That's kind of, that was the time that I think a lot of studios started green lighting those types of productions. So I think in the last 6 months and then maybe in the next 6 months, we're going to see a lot of those kind of movies start to come out, as a timeline that kind of makes sense. About a year ago, usually, features tend to go from 9 months to like 24 months in terms of their turnaround time. So it's going to be funny to kind of see those come out. But yeah, and I mean, I think that internship was great, and I learned a lot about like COVID, and I learned a lot about troubleshooting and making things work under pressure, which is all filmmaking is. Yeah.
I think in terms of making it work and also like making changes. I mean, obviously you did internships this past year virtually, which was great. You also did one with Neon, which was awesome. I know that. But I think one thing you did that I'd love to hear your thoughts on is that this past school year, I did my maximum amount of credits because when COVID happened, I realized like, okay, I want to graduate as soon as possible. But you did not do that. You kind of did the opposite. You did a very few credits, and it kind of extended your NYU timeline. But you did that for a specific reason, and I don't know if you want to share with that in terms of you being a DP, why you made that decision.
Yeah. So I chose to go part-time. So I only took 11 credits. So right under 12. When it's under 12, you're part-time, which means I got to pay less money, and then my scholarships got prorated. So financially, it was the right decision for me, and that's because I knew I wanted to take my camera classes, and I wanted my camera classes to be in person. And the way that I structured the timeline, I still needed a full year of camera classes. And if I had taken a full-time semester, then I would have graduated a semester early and only have gotten to take one out of the two classes about camera that I really wanted to take in person. So that being said, I went part-time. I moved up to Lake Tahoe and was like totally involved in nature, and I worked on a ski resort. And then I would, normally I'd be like, okay, I'm just going to be a total ski bum and just like forget about film for 6 months. But I was like, no, So I started, creating a lot of these action films and like action TikToks and
Just
using
to
my
clarify for
phone.
audience members, when he says action, he doesn't mean like kung fu movies. He means like
Action
high,
sports.
yeah, sports like skiing and
Yeah. Yeah.
snowboarding.
So was doing some ski films. I was doing some snowboard films. I did a few like kind of like travel documentary esque type of vibes. And it was all short form content. So that semester, I really honed in on short term content and also just social media and what it means to be a social media creator. And I think I still use those skills now. And honestly, if COVID, yeah, no, it's
Sometimes there's so many people who are interested in film and they want to be like this purist and like, oh, I don't want to shoot vertical or social media is dumb. But it's like, look, at
it's the
one
future.
point, people had to shoot digitally, right? People had to like change. People went from a studio system to shooting independent movies. Like our industry is not meant to be stagnant. Social media is where it's at, bro, and it's freaking awesome. So make cool stuff on social media, and you can still be a great filmmaker.
I mean, I don't want to go into a huge TikTok rant right now, but the amount of organic reach TikTok has is something that no other app has figured out, and I think that that's a really powerful thing to take advantage of, especially if you're a creator now. You're pretty much getting free exposure, where normally on Instagram or on Facebook you would have to pay to promote to get that many people's eyes on your work. TikTok just does it completely for free, and I think that that's something everyone needs to take advantage of right now. If we had a friend, remember Rowie, like during COVID, he found his niche. He created these really experimental kind of music videos, short form music videos that were on TikTok. They're so cool, and he blew up overnight.
He blew up, and then now he has a community, and now he's crowdfunding for his next film project, and now he has this community that supports him, and he can use that to make his project. So it's like it's all cyclical. When you're a filmmaker, it costs from one thing. But I think to focus us back in on film school, so you're making social media content, and so now obviously we did the latter. We talked about that last episode. So now you're going to go back to NYU and do your camera classes and just try to shoot a lot of student projects. Is that right?
So obviously, like I said before, I'm going to take my 2 in-person classes with camera, and I'm going to be in New York for another year, and I'm going to just crew and work triple as hard as I have ever worked in terms of, making connections. There's 2 years of students at NYU that I haven't even, met face-to-face yet because of COVID. So I'm definitely going to take advantage of that. I think a big thing at NYU is when you start crewing, you get invited back a lot more. And basically, if you want to, you can be working on a different person's set every single weekend. So I'm definitely going to be trying to do that and just trying to make up for lost time in terms of COVID. And really just try and hone in my craft, be a DP as much as possible, shoot as many things as possible, just to get that experience, because I think experience is number one, no matter what. And then just use my classes and use my kind of network there to really support that goal and that dream. And then eventually come back to LA after that and just start, freelancing and making it here. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a fun year, but it's going to be intense for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'll just quickly go. I kind of talked about this in the last episode, but when COVID happened for me, I came back here and I was still doing school virtually, but I was taking. Toby said he was taking a documentary class. I was taking a studio class, which was all based around shooting projects in like a TV studio. But because of COVID, that class was basically like, the class basically just became this virtual pitching class, which was cool, but not really that time consuming. So that spring, I focused on just. At first, the first few months, I think just like everybody, I was just kind of like depressed and like trying to navigate COVID. And then when summer hit, I started my production company. And so this past year, I've been doing my production company, which I can talk more in detail about in a future episode. And then I did film school. And then somewhere along the way, I decided I wanted to graduate in 3 years because I had the right amount of credits where I could take a full semester in the fall, 1 class in January, and then a full semester in the spring, and then graduate a year early. So I did that. So kind of the opposite of Toby, I wanted to get done as soon as possible, just because I wanted to start creating stuff, especially that I started this production company. And so in the fall, I did a lot of just academic classes, and I actually TA'd for a film class taught by Sydney Hugh. And that was really great for me to kind of almost be like a teaching role in that sense, assisting her with her teaching as well. And then in the spring, I took intermediate, which is kind of, I talked about this first episode. It's like normally the junior level, but I did it as my thesis. And that was really great for me. And right now that film is going to festivals and now I'm graduated. And I think for both of us, Toby and I, when COVID happened, a lot of people, made the most out of COVID. And we know people who shot way more stuff than we did and made way more cool stuff than we did.
Yeah.
But we also know people who, when COVID happened, they just took a break, and that was fine too. I think Toby and I landed somewhere in the middle where we kind of like adjusted and then tried to make the most of our circumstances. So in the end, it didn't really affect us that much. But I will say, and I think Toby and I could both relate to the fact that sometimes it felt stupid being in a Zoom class, talking theoretically about cameras and acting. It was, but also there's a lot of benefits for it too. At the same time, like some classes worked better. Like script writing, I almost never want to do that in person again. It was always like a screenwriting
easy.
workshop class over Zoom was just so much better because you could just read it on your own time, and then we could talk. And anyway. But just to kind of round out this episode, Toby, we talked about a lot of different things, and if people have questions for like more in detail about film school, please ask us. But just to kind of summarize your opinion, Toby. Mm-hmm. In 2021, heading into 2022, if someone came up to you and they're a high schooler and they really want to be a filmmaker, would you recommend film school to them?
My short answer is yes, but I will also preface that with it depends on who you are. If you're disciplined, if you're a self-starter, if you are so passionate about movies and you don't necessarily have the funds or resources to get to film school, then hey, screw it. Learn it all on YouTube, lynda.com, great resource. Get it done. Make it work. You know, like don't make that an excuse not to become a filmmaker. But if you can afford it, if it's within your means, within your kind of plan, I would say do it, not just because of what you're going to learn, but because of every other thing that you'll take away from it. The professors, the connections you'll get with professors. Some professors will help you get jobs. The people you meet, your peers, and the equipment you get. And all the small details about like about grabbing a lens and saying got it all those small things you won't find on lynda.com or YouTube because you're just going to have to learn that through experience and being immersed in that environment. So for the environment and for everything that film school has to offer, I'd say do it. But if you can't do it, you can still make it work because we're in 2021 and everything is online.
I think my answer is would I recommend it? It depends as well. I'd say for most people, I'd say yes. I think it's great. But again, it depends on your context. I think a big thing is one, can you afford it? If going to film school is going to put you in like so much of a financial like hardship that like your family won't be able to like survive it. Obviously, there's other means. Yeah. If you live in LA or if you live in New York, and you don't know if you should go to film school, then yeah, maybe you can make it work there. But if you live in like Kansas, where there's not the hugest indie film community, it may be worth it to go to film school. I think another thing too, I've heard this before, is that like, if you have a successful career as a filmmaker, even if you crew on sets and then make stuff and have a great career, you will never in your life get the same experience as what it's like to go to an undergrad film program. It really is like once in a lifetime experience, and it's not for everybody, but just know that in your mind that like maybe I'll try it if I'm thinking of becoming a filmmaker, and if it's not for you, that's fine. But truly, it's a good experience, and I think when you really add up the experience you get, the connections you make, and really just the guided curriculum, especially if you go to a school like NYU or there's a lot of state schools that have great film programs. Then it can be really great. But also do your research. Don't go to a film school just because they have a nice name or just because you think that they have a good program. Make sure it's right for you. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you just have to know how you're going to learn best. Some people don't learn well in the school environment, but they're amazing directors, and that's okay. So consider it all. But overall, I'd say, of course, it's worth it. And I loved my experience, and I think Toby loved his too.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think lastly, just closing it out, I think that if I could go back and do it all over again, I'd do the exact same thing. Even in mind that COVID happened, like I think I wouldn't change anything. And I think one thing that I also is kind of tentatively in my plan is, after I graduate and I come back and I'm not finding the jobs that I want to do, or I'm not where I'm at 3-4 years after graduating undergrad, graduate school is an option. And going to like AFI and specializing in cinematography at AFI, spending another arm and a leg for an education. But it's not about the education. It's about who I get in contact with, and that having that degree behind my name too is powerful. And I definitely entertain that idea too. Is like, if things don't work out and I'm not as busy as I want to be, or if I'm not on a role on set that I want to be, you can still go back to school, meet more people, and do it over again.
Yeah, and I think to just quickly add to that, I think grad school is a good thing, but also there's tons of really successful filmmakers who went to undergrad for something else and then they went to grad school for film.
Yeah.
And so that's a viable track if you want to be a
Yeah.
filmmaker. But also, I think the main thing at the end of the day is it's going to be hard no matter what. Being a filmmaker, a successful one, especially now with how much competition is like the hardest thing you can do. So I think sometimes people think that if they go to film school, it will be easier. So they're trying to decide, like, oh, should I do this? Or
No.
they think like they're paying money to make it easier. It's going to be hard no matter what. It's going to be hard if you go to
Yeah.
film school. It's going to be hard if you do it yourself. So it really depends. You have to be passionate and really love it.
All right, before we wrap up, Emilio, what is something you watched this week that stuck with you?
I'm going to say The Suicide Squad, which I have a feeling is yours too.
That was mine.
So I saw The Suicide Squad with my dad the other day in a movie at the movies, and I just went because I wanted to see something, and I really had really low expectations. I thought it was gonna be a fun time. I know James Gunn directed the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. I like those movies, but it's actually like really good and better than I expected it to be. It's very fun, great characters, and also just like when I heard that they were remaking it, but it wasn't a full remake. It was like almost like a 1.5 remake. Like, I was really confused how that was going to work out, but I thought the way that they did the script and the pacing was just very clever, and it was well paced, it was very funny, and it was a great cast. I will say my one gripe with the film is that I think James Gunn tried to make the story and the direction a little more complex and nuanced by adding this sort of like twist in the movie. I'm not going to spoil what it is. And that twist is very true. Like it's a good twist because it's like very real, and it's not always something you see in superhero movies, which is always like super patriotic. But when you see the movie, it felt like the twist was almost like fake, because like when you actually add up what the superheroes do in the movie, it doesn't line up with like what the moral height. Like he almost tries to make a philosophical statement or like a political statement, which you're like, ooh, that's cool. But then like when you really think about the movie, like that doesn't stay consistent, and it's even like maybe a little bit racist. I'm still like processing it, but that being said, again, it's a little more nuanced, and I don't think it's the biggest problem of the movie, but overall I'd say it's very fun, and I think one of the better paced superhero movies we've gotten in a long time.
For sure. I think he did something new, and I think I applaud that. Whenever someone does something new, even if it's bad, at least they're trying things. And someone as applauded as James Gunn to stray a little bit off. I mean, he always does something new, but he did something a little bit more new, I think, in this sense, which I think didn't necessarily work. I agree that the twist didn't land for me. I mean, I was working on all the marketing for this movie in Warner Brothers, so I literally got to see it through, and even watching, the final cut, I still, was like, whoa, like that just happened, like when I saw the twist. So like, it was, I also was surprised. I was surprised that I was surprised. But I think, again, I came in with low expectations, and whenever you come into a movie with low expectations, I think it's a good thing, because a movie might not be the best movie you've seen, but you still feel, kind of satisfied, even if it's not the best, just because it does a little bit better than what you think it's going to do. And I think that's what's really great about the Suicide Squad and the remake, is that it definitely did a little bit better than I thought it would do. And I think it definitely has its laughs, and it has its demographic. And, I'd probably see it again if I could. I agree that the pacing honestly in the beginning, the pacing didn't work for me, and that wasn't, it was kind of off-putting, but maybe that's how we were supposed to feel. I don't know. But
It's great. What I liked about it is, I mean, the whole movie is like, trying to be like silly and wacky, but I think what worked with it is it like really felt like a comic book, with like how quickly comic book plots just start. But yeah, anyway, so check out the Suicide Squad. Tell us what you think. Toby, if people want to get find you on social media or get in contact with you, how can they do that?
For sure, yeah. So I'm on TikTok at CineHacks. That is my handle for all things filmmaking. I put a bunch of tips and tricks out there, so give me a follow on there. And then my personal Instagram's Toby Romero, TobyRomer0. And then if you have any questions or want to reach out, anything, I'm happy to jump on a call or talk to anyone. I love talking about myself, so or just giving advice and stuff like that too. I don't have the most insight, but I'm happy to shoot me a DM. Emilio, where can we find you?
I'm Emilio Films on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and my website's emiliofilms.com. You can find me and get in contact, all those. ways. And then also, if you want to get in touch with us as a podcast, we have a new email. Toby, you want to tell them that?
Yeah, our new email is got.it.pod. So got.it.pod@gmail.com. And if you want to, suggest different talking points for next episodes, or just ask us a question to discuss, we're happy to do it. And whatever we can, help is definitely something that we like to do and would love to, provide some sort of insight. So please reach out. Don't hesitate to contact us, and we'll definitely get back to you. So I guess that wraps it up. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you so much. Catch you next week.